Hear me? Yes. Hey everybody, how you doing? Don't want to waste any time because I know we've got a lot of great stuff to get to here. But first, in a nutshell, we're talking about the digital transformation, the stages of grief. And when I first thought of this idea, it was not my idea. I was like, wow, this is really amazing because I feel like everybody who's been through any type of digital transformation has experienced these stages of grief, right? What would you say?
Absolutely, absolutely, Jeremy. And this curve, which is called the grieving curve, was founded in 1960. And I have been working on digital transformation for last 15, 16 years. And it very nicely applies to those 5 stages when any organization is going through a change. So I look at more as a change curve and the 5 stages of denial, anger, negotiation, despise, and then acceptance and moving on. And iterating between them is a very natural motion.
And I guess one of the nice things is, in your role, I know you're pretty early on in CAE, which means like this is a situation where, the sky's the limit. There are a lot of things you're identifying, and I imagine the company is in a bit of a digital transformation, but you're at the start of your own at the company.
Absolutely, and I think one of the good thing, and which is very impressive, given CAE's history, which is 75-year-old, very well-renowned company in the aviation space, hardware, firmware engineering, and they created this role, which is actually the integration of your classic CDO role with a CTO role, which is where you see the industry is moving. There is a collapse that's happening between the commercial product offers, if you are in a technology sector, and with the internal space, which typically is seen as the CDO and the CIO scope. But as you go through this digital transformation, system integration is at the heart of it, data integration is at the heart of it, and hence, collapsing these 2 roles at CAE was very impressive for me.
So at Insider Intelligence, obviously, one of the things that we're doing is charting a lot of data, some of our own, looking to see some of the best stuff that's out there. One thing that we've seen over and over with respect to digital transformation is people often say, well, you know what, I wish I had better delineation of the goals at the very beginning. I'm wondering if that's something that you've seen both from your own experience, but from your colleagues' experience as being like one of the biggest ways that you can potentially have a pitfall.
So I think this is where the companies are still navigating to figure it out, depending upon the size of the company. Should they keep the internal focused technology groups, which traditionally were called as CIO groups, separate from commercially outward looking product groups, which typically were the roles of the CTOs. What I have learned, because I have been a CTO for a big portion of my life, I have been a chief product officer for a big portion, and then a CIO. I think with that opportunity, what I learned is bringing them all together actually helps you create that enterprise view of bringing systems together and, most importantly, bringing data together. Digital transformation in every company is really struggling how to make data their asset. But systems are at the heart of it, and the more you bring the systems together, the data comes together.
And I think that this is one thing, because obviously that's one major pitfall that some people experience, but I think one thing we were talking about backstage that I think is really interesting is that the definition of digital transformation will be quite different depending on what sector you're part of. Maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Absolutely. So just with the audience, I have had the opportunity to work with pure technology sectors, then with the manufacturing sectors, industrial sectors, and what I have learned over the last 22 years is when you are in a pure tech space, it's very hard to understand what do I have to do to digitally transform myself, because I'm already a tech company. Compared to a traditional manufacturing OT kind of a company where, yes, you can say that I was not selling technology earlier, and hence I need to be much more applied technology enabled. The way that I describe and discuss this with my stakeholders when I bring them along on this journey is when you are in a tech sector, you are always digital. You are selling something which is in bits and bytes. However, digital transformation is more about your internal and at the inflection point functions. How do you digitalize them? Let's take an example. Go-to-market functions, which typically comprises of marketing, sales, customer care, your pricing groups. They have been operating for a long time with a mix of tools, with a mix of manual processes, and with the advent of Salesforce, a little bit of purchasing Salesforce and doing the same things there. But you will see in most of the companies, the data from the Salesforce doesn't flow seamlessly into your ERP systems, into your invoicing systems, because one didn't think through end-to-end process digitization. So when you start looking at your traditional Indian internal functions that were being done through tools, manual processes, human beings, when you start systematically digitalizing them through a stack of integrated systems is where you start achieving digital transformation. So this is what I have learned over years to start bring along my stakeholders in these conversations.
And it's interesting because one of the things that you just, like that process that you described, I don't think a lot of people, like show of hands, who thought that was a very sexy process that was described? Not too many hands, right. But as a CMO just actually recently told me, digital transformation as to actually accomplish it is sexy, but a lot of things that have to happen along the way in order to bring the company forward from a digital transformation, the underlying components are not necessarily sexy. But
yes.
How do you prove the value to, like, let's say a key stakeholder like a CFO, CEO, in order to get the budget approved and prove that there's going to be ROI at the end of the day of this process that's going to take a few years?
So I think that's the toughest part, because when you are in a outward-facing commercial positioning of a product, you are always driven by top-line growth, right? And when you are talking about digitalizing your internal processes, buying a technology, it's hard to position the value. However, the simplest thing is I always discuss with my CFOs that overall a company is looking for the margin, the actual profit. It's not always about the top line. It's the net of your top line and the bottom line. So everything which is done through a lot of discrete different tools without integration actually is eating into your margin. So once you start talking that language, I have seen my CFOs becoming my best friends over years, but it's really it's a margin play, right? So it's the top line and the bottom line. And digitalization is all about the bottom line management. It's all about efficiency, when top line is all about commercial.
No, and we see that a lot in terms of even, everything from beauty brands that we cover where they're just trying to get people into subscriptions more and more so that they can have those recurring charges to, Netflix now introducing advertising to monetize their content in a different way. And, to your point before, it can mean a different thing to each and every company. Now, I know that you're kind of at the very beginning of the process with your new company, but obviously I believe you have a long hardware legacy, right? So does some of that mean thinking to some extent is how can you diversify and
Yes.
not be beholden to the hardware as much?
Yes, so in context of CAE, CAE produces and it has 90% of the market share with the simulators in the aviation and the defense space. That's what we do. It's a leader in there and they do hardware engineering plus firmware engineering. But to your point, now that we are diversifying, we are going into a pure software play to provide complete suite of products to provide operational efficiency with the primary personas being pilots, the crews, the airlines, and what we call as OEMs, the Airbus and the Boeings. So we are now really going into this complete end-to-end offer line from hardware to firmware engineering to complete software play. But that's where this transformation is needed. That's where we go through those stages that, we have done it, but the same practices that you applied in the hardware engineering, where you were the market leader, do not apply on a software platform engineering. You have to follow different business model, transactional pricing, ARR versus IRR. So I think that's where you go through the transformation of the complete operating model.
So going back, I think, to previous experience, and again, the experiences of colleagues that you've, inevitably people have like a few drinks and then they start to tell a story. I've heard so many different issues in terms of why these things go wrong. One of the things that I've heard a lot about is kind of lack of alignment or losing that alignment along the way. And I'm wondering how much of a problem is that? Have you ever encountered that in your past experience?
Yes, absolutely. And I think alignment, and that again goes back to the 5 stages, denial. We have not done it this way in the past. We are a profitable company. We are a market leader. What more, or why do we have to change? And I think one of the things that I have learned over years is, and I typically tell it to my team members as well, is that the technologists have much more comprehension and internalization of what digital transformation really means. When we are talking to our non-technical stakeholders, I see it as more of an empathy game to actually bring them along with us, because I use a phrase very common, which is, they just don't know what they don't know. So I see that when you are in this transformation play, you have to be an educationist, you have to hold the hands, but not give up. Really, the resilience and continuing to negotiate, which is the 4th stage, bargaining, negotiation, probably not looking for 100%, compromising, but continuing to move forward is typically the approach that I take.
And I also think it's interesting that there are a lot of different stakeholders, of course, within this process. So you might have like a CTO who's in charge of this type of transformation, and speaking to a few different stakeholders, but then missing one or two along the way. Just missing one or two that could be important to it. And how do you go about, what's your process for essentially gathering requirements and figuring out, well, we're going to embark on this, we want to make sure we do it right, we want to make sure we leave nobody behind.
Yeah, I have made my share of mistakes by not including everyone, but over years, how I try to approach is first knowing the whole waterfront of how many stakeholders I do need to interact with and bring along with me, but then prioritizing, because it's a journey. It's not a slam dunk. You really have to prioritize. I believe in lean and agile practices, even in the process of transformation. So I'll give you an example. In my current job with CAE, we are in our fiscal year planning process. I'm 2 months into my new role, but for me it's now, okay, while I have to start transforming, the next fiscal year has to kick off. So you have to prioritize. So, whom should I prioritize? So right now I'm working more with my group leaders and the CFO, but maybe with my HR leader to transform the HR processes might be next fiscal year. So it's really a mechanism of prioritization to show the value, because you really have to show the value quickly in an iterative manner.
And I think also there's a matter of communication.
Yes.
And everybody knows that developers and techies are great at communication. But in seriousness, it's if you're not going to get to somebody's priorities, let's say, until Q2 2024, and they know that, they're less likely to be irate about it, at least if it's explained to them in some fashion.
No, I think, thanks for bringing it up. Communication and transparency is key to the success, right? I always believe that many a times I'm not giving the message that my stakeholders actually want to hear, but I prefer to give the message early on so that there is a trust. And the more transparent you are, I believe in the early days of over communication. I want to quote one of my ex-colleagues who was the leader of global supply chain in my previous job, typical manufacturing company. And when I, for the first time, told him, I just want to hear from you what your problems are, he's like, I don't need you, right? I know how to run my global supply chain. But after a year, we used to have a different conversation, right? You really have to insert yourself into the process and over-communicate in the early stages.
It's interesting because in my past experience with brands like L'Oreal and Unilever, they were at very different points of their digital transformation, and they were ready for certain messages. So in some ways, I feel like people like you have to be in the role where you have to say, okay, let me meet a organization where they're at based off of their digital acumen, based off of their appetite for disruption, and speak to them in a different way in order to explain the value of this project and what's going to be generated.
Yes, you really have to pace out depending upon your stakeholders. I believe that you need to have a vision, you need to have a 3-year plan, but ready to push it out to make it 4 or 5-year plan till the time you are making a progress. But you do have to bring along your stakeholders because they are the final consumer of what you are thinking of digitalizing. Because if you don't have a consumer, as I always say in a commercial product space, if you don't have a buyer, your solution will be sitting on the shelf. It's the same thing in the digital transformation process, because if I am transforming the processes of my go-to-market team, they are the final consumer. They are the personas who are going to use Salesforce the right way. They are going to be the users of my MES system, my ERP systems, my finance team. So you really have to bring them along with you in this journey.
Yeah, and I think to go back to the idea about bringing different people along and getting that buy-in, success is going to be different depending on which department that you're talking to. And obviously not everybody can be serviced at the same time. So how do you get that alignment and get people to buy in? And in some ways it seems aligned with the company will do well if this transformation is successful, even if your particular department isn't necessarily prioritized at this moment. So how do you kind of get everybody to coalesce around one particular vision?
So there again, it goes back to initially identifying the use cases which provides the maximum value. As an example, the go-to-market functions is one of the best inflection point function between complete internal and external. Because the go-to-market functions sit between your commercial products and your internal functions, the HR, the finance, the global supply chain functions. So I typically start with my go-to-market functions because there you can actually in a quantifiable manner show the value. You can show how your NPS has improved, how you are converting the leads into the opportunities. You can actually put some very quantifiable KPIs to show the progression of digitalization versus maybe in a pure HR function, right? I'm not discounting the importance of employee workspace, but that might be my step 2 once the value of digitalizing the go-to-market function has proven its points. So it's really how you prioritize, show and tell to win over the stakeholders to then come along with you in this journey.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but I know we've got to let bounce. So thank you guys so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you.